Welcome to Dan's On Site with Dan Dutton and Dan Goley, a podcast and YouTube show dedicated to all things real estate, delivering market information, interviews from all perspectives, and tips for everyone involved in or interested in real estate. We'd love to hear from you. Dan's at dansonsite.com. Hey, welcome to Dan's On Site. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, dansonsite.com. We'd love to hear from you, Dan's at dansonsite.com. Today, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about, we're a year into COVID, essentially a year into COVID. The media will have you believe that retail is basically folded up and brick and mortar doesn't exist anymore. I think Amazon does come to my house quite a bit, but, anyway.
The media is our friend, though, if you think about it.
Well,
it opens up a lot of opportunities for us. But we'll get into that in a minute.
We will get into that. So, but let's jump right into it and talk about retail as it looks in March 2021, a year into COVID. And let's start with sales. Jordan, tell us about any significant retail sales lately.
Yeah, there were a couple significant transactions. The first being 72nd Crossing at 72nd and Howard Street across from Nebraska Furniture Mart. The anchors at this center are Michael's, PetSmart, and Big Lots, and that sold for $13.125 million or $135 per square foot. The second large one was Applewood Center, and that's located at 96th and Q Street, and then that is anchored by Hy-Vee. That sold for $10.6 million or $93 per square foot.
Yeah, so a couple of significant retail centers sold in the last, I guess those happened all in the last 6 months or less. So Grace, what's the vacancy outlook on Omaha right now?
Yep, so our vacancy rate here in Omaha is sitting at about 6.2%. This isn't a significant change from what we've seen these past few years. I look back to where we were a year ago, last March, and all of us being like, what is retail going to look like over the next year? And I think we can all say, while we did see some closures, there was a lot more leasing transactions done than we would have thought. I mean, if you look at the numbers for 2020, the net absorption for retail leasing is negative, but the main tenants that are driving that number down were Fresh Times, the Gordmans. We know of some pretty significant deals that were done, most of which being in the second half of 2020. And we'll expect those numbers, that vacancy rate to go down. I know we can dive deeper into those numbers in a little bit.
Yeah, it's all how you look at all that stuff and how they categorize what really a vacancy is.
Right.
Yeah, and the big thing is when we look at these market numbers, it takes a quarter or two to catch up with the leasing that's happened. So all of a sudden, we know what the leasing that took place in the second half of the year was in 2020, or maybe the last 6 months. It might take until September 2021 before we start seeing those catch up with the stats. But so Dan, we know that vacancy is low. I mean, pretty low. And we know, and we'll get into a little bit more detail, that activity is pretty strong. So that must mean there's construction just happening everywhere, right?
Which is not true either. I mean, when people view construction, they'll drive down and see Crossroads and how they're tearing it down, and they'll call that under the construction zone. Well, while that's true, that's under construction, that's only early phase of what's happening. In other words, that product there will start to hit the vacancy and occupancy numbers in probably 2022, 23. The construction we're seeing now is up and down 204th Street, which if you drive essentially from Gretna to Elkhorn, you'll see all that stuff going on and things coming out of the ground there. And then a project that we work on quite a bit, which is La Vista City Center. And that is coming out in phases. The apartments and multifamily projects there were coming out now. And then they're just slowly adding more and more square footage as, well, the apartments are going crazy down there, as the apartments are filling and then as we're leasing. So when we talk to national groups, people always ask us, or when we tour national groups, it's probably the better way to say it, we drive around, they don't see a lot of for lease signs. Now, for us as brokers, that's probably not a great thing because we need vacancy in order to make a living. But what the good side of that is the local economy. We don't see those dips and super heavy valleys and then the peaks coming out. We're pretty stable, and a lot of that is controlled construction. And so we're fortunate with that. We don't have a list of 43 construction projects going on. Maybe in the office sector, they could probably talk more to that. But really, for us, that keeps those vacancy numbers that Jordan has talked about manageable is that we aren't really doing the speculative construction like we've done in the past.
So if we go over to a town like Des Moines probably has a lot more construction happening than a town like Omaha. I think what's interesting and what's potentially, I don't want to call it concerning because I don't know that it's concerning, but as we look forward, we see basically construction as we stand right now happening in two spots. It's either happening in La Vista at that one project, or it's happening at 204th and west at 204th. That makes up by far the majority of construction projects. Then if we dive into those construction numbers a little bit more, we see a significant portion of all construction projects are actually single tenant builds. That's a restaurant, Taco Bell, a Burger King, something like that. It's a gas station. Those would all be in those retail construction numbers too. And so as we look forward, there was a report that came out the other day, and the Omaha Metro grew at 9% growth from 2010 to 2020. Population growth, yes. And that's a pretty good number for Omaha. Omaha doesn't usually grow quite that quick. And that's 23rd in the nation for growth. We've consistently seen vacancy come down from maybe 9 or 10%, and it's come down to 6.2% now. If we take malls, because do malls really fit in that number? Does it not fit in that number? What does that mean to the?
Right. It's good to pull that number out and look at it in itself.
Right.
Well, Oakview Mall is a classic example of that. I mean, are they still counting Crossroads as a vacancy in there? I don't think so, but some stats may, just because it's a natural grab of retail real estate. But Oakview is so split up in what we're looking 4 different ownership groups there now, and maybe it's redeveloped, but it's been empty. It's kind of skews the numbers a little bit.
Right. What's going to happen with Oakview? Is that a number that really should be? So if you take out the malls, we get down to under 5.5% vacancy. If we take that a step further, just for us, talking here, and take out the Gordmans and the Fresh Times, because those are actually, in my mind, significant redevelopments that have to happen, right? You're talking about millions of dollars have to be put into these buildings so they can be divided up from multi-tenant as opposed to a single tenant. Grocery stores kind of carry their own special level of construction requirements from switching. If we take those out, we're actually talking about a vacancy rate of like 4.5%, which is crazy. It's a number in my 20 years have never seen. We're seeing, as we talked about, very limited construction and happening kind of towards the edges of town. So if you need space at 120th and Center, where we have space available.
Interesting how you...
But limited space available. Like how much longer is it? And I guess I'm just going to throw out a whole bunch of stuff that we could talk about. We have several examples recently within the last, since January 1st, right, of restaurants. We know in this room, restaurant market might be the hottest it's ever been. There are so many restaurants out looking. COVID, everybody needs a drive-through nowadays.
Yep.
Not 1 lane, 2, and if it was 2 lanes, it's now 3.
So if you need, let's say you need a restaurant from 72nd to 180th, where do you go? How do you find that space?
It's ultra competitive.
Well, I mean, we had the one at 180th and Center that we got numerous offers on, and
I get calls still weekly about that space, and it's been leased up for a month now.
The price per square foot on sales of those buildings is unbelievable. So as we go forward, I think, is it fair to say that landlords are probably going to be in an okay position moving forward? That's probably.
Oh yeah, I mean, the growth isn't there. I mean, now those people we see it. We do a lot of work on 119 the Pacific, and historically vacancy has been there, and excuse me, up 10, 12, 13, 14%. I mean, we have the Big Fred's building that's full. We have action on the Bagel Bin building, which will be full. And those are, those are not on Main and Main, although they have good access, but those are definitely secondary type locations. And then across the street, which is, where the Brother Sebastian's and stuff, there's only 2 bays, I think, left over there now with action on one of them. Mm-hmm. And, those are, you mentioned 120th and West Center, where that's just a field of Center Street facing retailers where it's great for exposure. After we ink all the ones that we have in play, it's going to be minimal vacancy over there as well.
Right. And I mean, let's talk about the spaces that do sit, right? Because to the average everyday person, you might see, oh, well, that space is sat for forever. I would argue the 6,000 square foot restaurant spaces there's numerous ones of those out there. There's minimal 6,000 square foot restaurants doing deals anymore.
And so that's where we probably, we talked about the Gordmans, right, that have to be redeveloped, the money that has to be put into those. And the truth is, on those 6,000 square foot restaurants, they're
no longer going to be a restaurant.
They have to be redeveloped too.
Right.
That doesn't mean that maybe a restaurant does want it, but it means you have to tear down the building and build a new restaurant.
Break it in half.
Or break it in half.
And that's a significant cost.
Mm-hmm.
It is a significant cost. And so let's say you're a 1,500 square foot tenant or a restaurant tenant, to me, what does the market mean for you? If you need space, it means that you have to have your strategy in place. You have to know what it is that I want and what does that look like. And I better know probably what I'm willing to pay for, right? Mm-hmm. Then I better have a market, a knowledgeable, market leader that can go out and find me that space, a broker in that market mm-hmm. who knows, there's a lot of different brokers that play around in retail. It's fun to play around in sometimes, but truthfully, in this kind of market, you got to have a retail expert. You got to have a broker who's in retail every single day, who knows about the product coming available. Because honestly, when Jordan, you're talking about 180th and Center, what happened there? It was leased before it ever went on the market. It never made it to the market. The KFC at 132nd and Center never went on the market.
I always bring up our deal in Lincoln, the Forever 21 space in Gateway Mall. We ran Ross Dress for Less through there. We knew as Forever 21 was struggling, and this is partly a story, but partly shows that sometimes you need to know the experts in the market. I'm being politically correct.
I'm glad that you're making the announcement of Ross at Gateway Mall in Lincoln. Was in the paper down there, but
I figured the paper's got it. It's great, but that's an example of we knew a retailer was going out, and when Forever 21 announced his bankruptcy, we already had a lease in place, and so everything is going. I mean, it goes back to what we were just talking about on the market knowledge. If you don't know, really, well, I could. 132nd and Center, there's action on some of those vacant bays there. So I think you'll see probably summertime, a lot of those being absorbed here in short order.
There's also going to be opportunities, I think, for tenants who have, say over the last 10 years, there's been retail tenants who maybe be in Class B retail space that have found themselves in Class A retail space. Those tenants who are willing to go back to a Class B retail space and give up their Class A space may find really significant opportunities because they do that. Landlords who are so desperate to get that Class A space back because there's a restaurant or a bank or somebody who's willing to pay them, what may be considered outrageous rent to the tenant that's in there now. If they're willing to give up that space and go to a B location again, there could be really opportunities for those guys too. Mm-hmm. So I'll just, I guess I would leave it with this. If I could give you one recommendation, if you're in the market for retail space, this team here, this is what we do. It's all we do generally. Call us, give us a call. We would like to talk to you. We'd like to help you. Goalie, any parting thoughts before we get out of retail for today?
It's a repeat of what we've been saying. Call the experts in the field. They usually have the information you want. It's in order in today's world. Everything is not always out there. It's always, you have to be one step ahead of what everyone's doing. And so we have a pretty good pulse, not just on market knowledge, but we have a vast, over 5 million square feet of managed property. So we have a pretty good pulse on maybe who's struggling and who's not. And usually that's the best way to find opportunities in today's market.
Jordan, Grace, parting comments before we leave?
I think it's just going to be a busy year. Excited to kind of see our way through what looks like the end of COVID soon.
So, Goalie, where we started, the media. Did we ever figure out whether the media is giving an accurate presentation on brick and mortar retail or not?
No. That's a whole nother episode. I don't want to go down that road right now.
Well,
we need an hour.
The only thing, I think, the only part of the market right now that I think people have a real question mark about is movie theaters. That's not something that's going to be decided today. That'll be something we'll have to come back and talk about in 6 months or potentially a year. Did movie theaters make it through this?
Well, those are usually tough repurposes too, just because of the floor angle, the pitch. I mean, it's not like we mentioned 6,000 or 7,000 square foot restaurant where typically they're on grade and it's easy to repurpose. Movie theaters are a whole different animal.
Movie theaters are also not usually on main to main. They're not usually
Right.
on the high profile corner. So as a guy who has young kids and loves going to the movie, I hope that they stick around. Many of them stick around, but that'll be a discussion for another day. As always, Mr. Goalie.
Thank you for tuning in. We're really excited. We kind of took a little bit of a pause there due to the depth of the COVID and all the holiday seasons. But look for us the rest of 2021. Certainly, we have a lot of episodes that we have planned, and we're going to be sending them out rapid fire. So thank you again.
Grace and Jordan, thank you guys very, very much for coming in today. I'm Dan Dutton. Dan's on site, dansonsite.com. We would love to hear your comments on what's happening in retail. Maybe you have a different perspective or a different viewpoint. We'd love to hear from you, Dan's at dansonsite.com. I don't usually pitch us very much in these Dan's on Site, but I will say because of the market being the way it is, we're all with Omni partners. If we can help, we would love to help you out. So please look us up. Apple, Spotify, any place you find your favorite podcast, find us on there, and we look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks again for joining us. Find us on Facebook, at YouTube, Dan's On Site. All your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. We would love it if you hit the subscribe button and also leave us a review. Reach us at dansonsite.com.